Hi, I am a student at Arizona State University majoring in sociology, and my goal right now, as for a career for a guy in his 60s, is to complete a book dealing with and developing conservative social theory. Um, I've written many books in the past. I've hosted a podcast. I've been a radio host, and I'm going back to college at my older age, where I also studied at Bunker Hill Community College here in my hometown of Boston. Um, and my goal is to develop, as I said, conservative social theory and conservative social analysis. Now, the course that I just am completing right now, which is one of the best I've done, by the way, at Arizona State, deals with inequality and social change in society. Um, on a number of levels. We did modules on housing inequality, on racial inequality, on international inequality between the United States and other nations, um, education, health. And these are all very well developed um, presentations, but they are overwhelmingly liberal and in some cases radical in terms of the writings that we've read, the videos we watched, and the excellent lectures by the professor. And I find that to be all well and good. It's very good data. It's a great insight into these problems. However, I want to develop a conservative response to these problems. And that's what my book is about. My book also includes work I did at Bunker Hill and other classes. At this point, it's pretty big. It's about 75,000 words, but I'm planning on turning each of the modules in this course into a chapter in this book with conservative and analysis and kind of counterpoints to some of the liberal positions that are taken. And overall, my contention is that the entire field of sociology has become so dominated by liberal and left thinkers that it's unbalanced. That in order for sociology to find its true mission, I think, as a social science, is to include at least some canon of conservative opinion and analysis. It should be part of the whole picture in order for sociology to really become more balanced. And I think it's a good thing that now it's including career paths for younger people, because I think that a lot of students weren't taking sociology. There's been a shrinkage because young people are like looking at education, and by the way, not rightly, as something that's a vocational training, when in fact what it is a way to think and analyze the world we live in. But I think that sociology needs to take the next step and include conservative opinion. Um, so that's what my book is about. Um, what is conservative theory? What I would argue and what I'm working on in the book so far is that conservative opinion is actually non-ideological. It is natural to the human being. We are all conservative in the real sense, in that it's built into maybe even into the DNA of every living person, in that we want self-interest, we want property, we need a means of exchange so we can trade with each other in terms of goods and services and intellectual property, and to measure value. And we also need government in order to organize our system so that we can have freedom under God, we can have independence, and we can actualize our own life and come aware of our own agency in the world and our own purpose. So that's conservatism conserves literally these institutions that promote that. And those interests, I would argue, are in the best interest of the individual and of the society. And I think that's been proven out. We are also capitalists in that we believe in the free market. And we are moralists in that we believe that there is a creator of the universe, whether we call that creator God or whether we do like Jefferson referring to it as the creator, nature and nature's God or whatnot. The important factor to that, whether you believe in a divine creator or not, is that we believe that there is an external force that created natural law, that created our existence. It is one that has objectivity, even if we don't understand that. And it is one that cannot be manipulated by the imperfect hand of man. In other words, that we have inherent rights. We have what Jefferson called in the Declaration of Independence unalienable rights, that they exist, and that the purpose of government is to preserve, protect, and defend those rights so that we can be free. Now, the course spent a lot of time, and rightfully, criticizing what's called neoliberalism. I could also call it neoconservatism, in that it's sort of capitalism run amok, and it is. It's absolutely true. But it needs to be understood from a conservative standpoint that capitalism unbridled is as false an idea as communism is or fascism is. These are not natural to human society. They are not promoting the best aspects of what it is to be alive: freedom, self-interest. And that in order to have capitalism, which is the best system known to man with all of its flaws, and wasn't it Winston Churchill who once said, it's a terrible system except when you compare it to all the others. I'm paraphrasing. But in order to have a capitalist system where you have self-actualization, free markets, and all of the institutions that we associate with capitalism, like property and belief in God and family, you have to have sovereign nation states that by which collective will can be expressed through elected officials under a constitution in the American context specifically. You also need a moral code, as John Adams once famously said, and that in the case of the United States, we draw that moral code from the Judeo-Christian tradition. Now, other nations have other means. Islamic nations have their thing, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever. But in America, we're based on the Judeo-Christian moral code, and that is part of where we draw our understanding of the universe, where we draw our laws, such as laws against things like murder or whatnot. And you need to have a kind of like, it's like a football game. You need to set up the rules and the goalposts, and then you can let everyone be free within that context. But in the case of neoconservatism, the criticism, and rightfully, is that it has basically allied itself with the internationalists, particularly after World War II, who seek a world order. An exemplar of that would be Cecil Rhodes, the founder of the Round Tables in South Africa, which he called for an Anglo-American establishment that would informally rule the world. A good book about that is by Professor Carroll Quigley called Tragedy and Hope. He was a professor at Georgetown University. He was a mentor to Bill Clinton. And that basically meant that the Anglo-American nations could intervene militarily even in other nations that did not subserviently lie down and allow American corporations to come in and exploit their resources. And that's unbridled capitalism. That is corporate power that's not elected and not accountable, aligning itself with governments, whether by force or by willingness, and essentially developing a world order, a world government, if you will, not formally. They leave in place the borders and they leave in place, the trappings of independence. But in fact, they informally rule events by controlling finance, by controlling politics, and by controlling culture. And neoliberalism it plays ball with that. It's part of it. And the antidote to that is American nationalism, frankly, and nationalisms of all nation states, because that is the best check and the best balance to that kind of unbridled capitalist power. In that way, we can maintain a neoliberal position domestically by allowing for the accumulation of capital, but at the same time, we can maintain a strong nation with borders that preserve and protect the rights of the citizen who has invested their life into their respective nation. And we can engage in social programs that actually empower people to be independent. For example, today, as I do this video, President Trump has just rolled out, as part of the big, beautiful bill, a program that basically puts $1,000 into a bank account for every child born or adopted in the United States. That money basically accumulates interest invested in the index fund, the blue chip funds, until that child reaches 18 years old. People can also contribute to that fund up to $5,000 a year at a tax deduction. And the result is that when that child reaches 18 years old, they can then get access to those funds and use it in a prescribed way, either for education in a accredited institution, investment in a new business, or as a down payment for a new home. So it's a great way to develop institutional wealth, particularly for lower income people, because the program is only for people who earn less than a certain amount. It's for lower income people, just like a lot of the other Trump programs are specifically targeted in that way, like no tax on Social Security, only if your retirement is under $50,000 a year. No tax on tips. That is basically for working people as well. These are programs that a government can do to actually help lower income people develop wealth, and at the same time, a responsible national government removes unnecessary regulation to business, keeps taxes low, and essentially raises funds by other nations doing business in this country in the form of tariffs. By these means, we can put our own sovereign nation first, and by doing so, we're putting ourselves first. Anyway, I'm engaging in a little bit of conservative social analysis here. And I respect left analysis, which seems to basically call ultimately for more collectivism, more internationalism, and a reduction in the individual consciousness as a self-created person. And that's fine. Again, my goal in writing my book is to counter that with alternative views and to engage in respectful debate on these important topics. I would also add that there's a lot of euphemistic talk in the readings that I did about solidarity and then how solidarity has become dissipated due to distrust in government. And by the way, the reason we distrust government is because our government has consistently lied to us. That's why one of the main reasons why President Trump won. All of the lies around the COVID pandemic and the vaccine, all of the lies around the 2020 election, all of these things, people know this, and they know that the media is playing ball with these sort of internationalist forces that don't respect the sovereign right of the individual under God, which is the American way. Jefferson described it best in the Declaration of Independence. We are endowed by our Creator, God, with certain unalienable rights. And then he lists those. And that basically we're products of the state. We're clients of a government who then gives us rights. That's the royal idea that basically our founding fathers rejected when they rejected the monarchy of King George III and Parliament. We understand that rights come from the Creator, not from the state. This comes right out of the Bible, by the way, when God basically says that he created men and women in his image. That's in Genesis. And it does also say women, by the way, equally. So that's the American understanding. That's natural. That's conservative. We're not human resources to be controlled by the state. We are self-actualized individuals under God who have the ability to know truth and to act with agency in our self-interests at all times. But anyway, back to solidarity. I would argue that an excellent example of solidarity, one of the most stunning ones in recent years that I can think of, was the protest conducted by Canadian truckers when their government was rolling out the electronic health cards that would prove that you had taken the jab, the COVID jab. You couldn't get into a restaurant or a store. You couldn't buy food unless you showed your health card. That health card, according to the World Economic Forum, was going to become electronic. It would be digitized. And eventually it would be given to every single human being. And they understood that that would be the end of freedom. We would then be like, already communist China does some of this, where you'd have to have a score in order to get food or in order to leave your village. And that score would be depending upon who you were politically, if you were, on the right side. And it would be completely controlling. You would no longer have freedom, just like in communist China. Well, the truckers stood up to it and they said no. And they started blocking the highways and they showed their agency. That was solidarity and that was guts, because they were viciously attacked. They were called Nazis, even though most of these are men of color, by the way, putting that aside. They had their bank accounts shut down. They had their social network removed. I mean, there was, they were being threatened to be put in prison over this. And it was spreading. It was coming to the United States, Australia, New Zealand, France, even Israel. Truckers were starting to wake up and reject this card, this agenda. And by the way, COVID was already over, so there wasn't even an issue. Putting aside the actual issue, that's another subject. But the point is that they were about to bring the Canadian economy to its knees, and Canada folded. There would be no more cards. That ended it. Here in Boston, in my hometown, we had a newly elected mayor, Michelle Wu, who had just taken office and who announced that she was going to make it mandatory for you to show your vaccine card in order to enter a restaurant or a store or a building in Boston. Because of the truckers, that disappeared. Now, I'm not saying it's not still on the books, but it's not an issue. Everyone ignored it anyway. But the point is that the whole agenda of a world card that would force you to give up your freedom ended with the truckers. And that is solidarity, if there ever is one. Now, that may happen again, but people are more aware of the time, of what time it is, as they like to say, as my friend Charlie Kirk used to say. And they're more aware of the fragility of freedom. They understand that freedom doesn't grow on trees. It is natural, but that we have to wake up and fight for it sometimes, or at least advocate for it. And I see that as my mission. I see that as my task as a sociologist or a budding sociologist in my old age, getting a degree and doing my podcasting and writing my book. And I'll just sort of wrap it up because I don't want to keep you any longer than the required time here by saying that it's a great course. The whole definition of neoliberalism is right on the money, but the solution is not socialism and is not as increase in government, but in fact the opposite, a strengthening of the sovereign rights of nation states to become aware of their agency, and a return to a belief that rights come from the Creator, not from the state, thus strengthening the individual under God, and of programs that actually help people build wealth. like the ones that President Trump is advocating. In some cases, maybe rightfully, and we could argue those, but generally speaking, programs that help the individual accumulate the capital that they create, with a safety net, of course. Anyway, on that note, I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank the professor for offering this excellent course. I hope that when I'm done with my book, that he may read it, maybe write a little blurb on the book cover, and keep on keeping on. Thank you very much.